They never told me why the rules existed. Not during my interview. Not during my orientation. Not even when I signed my contract. It wasn't until I clocked in for my first night shift at St. Vincent's Memorial Hospital that someone handed me the list. The paper was old, the edges curled and yellowed. Someone had taped it to the break room wall, right above the coffee maker. At first, I thought it was a joke, some kind of twisted initiation for new hires. But then I saw the way the other nurses avoided looking at it, like making eye contact with the words might somehow pull them in. Rules for the night shift. 1. Do not leave room 616 unlocked after midnight. 2. If you hear someone calling your name from an empty hallway, do not answer. 3. Do not touch the patient in bed 3 if their eyes are open, but they are unresponsive. 4. If the elevator doors open, but no one is inside, do not step in. 5. If the power flickers twice, find Dr. Ashford immediately. And at the bottom, written in red ink, a final warning. Failure to follow these rules will result in consequences. I scoffed. This had to be a joke. You should take it seriously, a voice said behind me. I turned to see a woman stirring powdered creamer into a styrofoam cup. She had tired eyes and dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail. Her name tag read Sandra. Right, I said, trying to hide my smirk. What happens if I break one? Ghost gonna drag me away. Sandra didn't smile. She took a slow sip of coffee, then said, People who don't follow the rules don't last long here. The way she said it made my skin prickle. I was no stranger to hospitals. I'd worked in emergency rooms, trauma units, understaffed ICU floors. The worst I'd faced were overworked doctors and impatient patients. This felt different. Thomas, right? She asked. Yeah. First night. Yep. She sighed. Look, I know it sounds crazy. Just follow the rules. That's all I'll say. Before I could ask anything else, she tossed her empty cup in the trash and left the break room. I stood there for a moment, staring at the list again. The words stared back. The clock on the wall read 11:57 p.m. Time to work. The halls of St. Vincent's felt different at night. During the day, hospitals buzz with life. Phones ringing, shoes squeaking against tile, conversations overlapping in a constant hum of activity. But here, after dark, the silence settled and heavy. The overhead lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, something older like dust trapped in the walls. I checked my assignment chart. The night shift was short-staffed, as usual. Only 3 nurses, a security guard, and 1 doctor, Dr. Coleman Ashford. I hadn't met him yet. Most of my patients were routine cases, post-surgical recovery, a few elderly patients with complications, a man who had overdosed and was now sleeping off the worst of it. I moved through my rounds quickly, checking vitals, adjusting for drips, jotting notes on my clipboard. Everything was normal, until I heard it. A voice, faint, echoing down the hallway. Thomas. I froze. The hallway ahead of me was empty. The sound had come from around the corner, near the storage rooms. Thomas. The voice was soft, almost playful. It sounded familiar. Sandra. I exhaled, relieved. Sandra? That you? No answer. I took a step forward. The air felt colder. Another step. A shadow shifted, just beyond the turn, disappearing from sight. I swallowed. My heart thumped against my ribs. This was stupid. I knew it. It was probably a trick, or maybe I was just overtired. Still, I reached the corner and peered around. Nothing. The hallway stretched on, empty. The storage room doors were closed. Thomas. The whisper came from behind me. I spun around, pulse hammering. No one was there. A slow, crawling chill crept up my spine. I stood frozen, gripping my clipboard so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then footsteps approached from the opposite hall. Sandra. She stopped when she saw me. Her eyes darted around. Did you just... She hesitated. Did you hear something? I forced a laugh. Yeah. Thought I heard you calling my name. Sandra's face paled. Thomas. I wasn't calling you. A lump formed in my throat. Did you answer it? She asked, voice sharp. I hesitated. Her expression darkened. You shouldn't have. A door creaked somewhere down the hall. We both turned toward the sound. Room 616. The door was open. Sandra grabbed my wrist. Come on, she hissed. We need to find Dr. Ashford. Now. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to demand what the hell was going on. But something in the air, something unseen but pressing, made me shut my mouth and follow her. And behind us, down the hall, the door to room 616 creaked open just a little wider. I had been on shift for only a few hours, but the hospital already felt different than anywhere I had ever worked. The silence was heavier here. It wasn't the usual nighttime quiet of sleeping patients and low murmurs of the nurses' station. It was deeper, like the building itself was holding its breath. I tried to shake the feeling and focus on my rounds. That's when I heard it. My name. Thomas. It was soft, just above a whisper, coming from the hallway behind me. I turned, expecting to see Sandra or Elijah, but the corridor was empty. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, flickering once before settling again. I frowned. Maybe I had imagined it. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. Thomas, come here. The voice was familiar, like someone I knew but couldn't quite place. It sent a small shiver up my spine. I took a step forward, peering down the hall, but the nurse's station was empty. The double doors leading to the east wing were closed. Something about it felt wrong. I took a slow breath, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Night shifts did that to people. I had worked in hospitals long enough to know exhaustion could make you hear things, see things, even feel things that weren't really there. Still, I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my back. I turned away and walked toward the break room, where Sandra was pouring coffee into a cracked white mug. She glanced up at me, her face tired but alert. "You okay?" she asked, stirring in some powdered creamer. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just thought I heard something. Someone calling my name." Sandra's hand froze mid-stir. Her expression darkened, the lines around her mouth tightening. "Where?" she asked quietly. "Hallway by the east wing," I said. It almost sounded like, "You didn't answer, did you?" Her tone was sharp now, urgent. She set her mug down on the counter, her knuckles turning white. I blinked at her reaction. "No. I looked around, but I didn't say anything back." Sandra exhaled, her shoulders loosening just slightly. "Good. Never answer." I let out a small, nervous laugh, expecting her to smirk, to tell me it was just an inside joke among the night staff. But she didn't. Her expression stayed serious, her eyes locked on mine. "What happens if I do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She picked up her coffee and took a slow sip before answering. "You don't want to find out." I opened my mouth to ask more, but before I could, my pager buzzed. A patient needed assistance. Sandra walked past me, heading back toward the station, but before she left the break room, she paused. "If you hear it again," she said without turning around, "ignore it, no matter what it sounds like." "You okay?" she asked, stirring in some powdered creamer. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just thought I heard something. Someone calling my name." Sandra's hand froze mid-stir. Her expression darkened, the lines around her mouth tightening. "Where?" she asked quietly. "Hallway by the east wing," I said. It almost sounded like, "You didn't answer, did you?" Her tone was sharp now, urgent. She set her mug down on the counter, her knuckles turning white. I blinked at her reaction. "No. I looked around, but I didn't say anything back." Sandra exhaled, her shoulders loosening just slightly. "Good. Never answer." I let out a small, nervous laugh, expecting her to smirk, to tell me it was just an inside joke among the night staff. But she didn't. Her expression stayed serious, her eyes locked on mine. "What happens if I do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She picked up her coffee and took a slow sip before answering. "You don't want to find out." I opened my mouth to ask more, but before I could, my pager buzzed. A patient needed assistance. Sandra walked past me, heading back toward the station, but before she left the break room, she paused. "If you hear it again," she said without turning around, "ignore it, no matter what it sounds like." Then she was gone. I stood there for a long moment, my coffee forgotten, the hum of the vending machine the only sound in the room. Something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what she meant. I should have listened. The rules were clear. Everyone who worked the night shift at St. Vincent's followed them without question. But I was new, and I didn't believe in ghosts or curses. Hospitals were full of strange stories. Half of them were just the product of sleep-deprived minds. That's what I told myself, anyway. Until that night, I was making my rounds, pushing a medication cart down the dimly lit hallway. The air was thick, almost stale, and the fluorescent lights above buzzed like insects trapped in glass. Room 616 sat at the end of the corridor, its metal door shut tight, just like every other night. I had noticed it on my first shift. Unlike the other rooms, 616 had no nameplate, no patient records outside, no sign that anyone had been in or out for years. But it was always locked. That was one of the rules. Never leave room 616 unlocked after midnight. I had asked Sandra about it once, but she had just shaken her head. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, Thomas. I didn't believe in hospital superstitions. I was a man of logic, of science. So that night, I tested the rule. At exactly 12:03 a.m., I stopped in front of the door. My hand hovered over the handle for a moment, my pulse quickening despite myself. It was cold, too cold. I took a slow breath and twisted the knob. It didn't budge, locked as always. Then, with barely any effort, I pushed the door open. I froze. It wasn't locked. The air inside smelled wrong, damp, like rotting wood, like something left in a dark place for too long. My stomach twisted at the scent, but I stepped inside anyway, letting the door drift open behind me. The room was empty. No hospital bed, no machines, no windows. Just 4 gray walls, a single flickering light bulb overhead, and a chair. A chair facing the wall. Something about it made my chest tighten, as if I were trespassing somewhere I didn't belong. The longer I stood there, the more I felt it, the air pressing against me, thick like water, like something unseen was watching me. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I stepped closer. The chair shifted. Not much. Just an inch. Just enough. I stopped breathing. Then, ever so slowly, the chair began to turn. I didn't move. I couldn't. The sound it made was soft, wood scraping against the floor, but the weight of it, the wrongness of it, was crushing. The chair kept turning until it faced me completely. There was someone sitting in it. No, not someone. Something. A shadow, stretched and thin, like a body drained of all color, all life. It sat perfectly still, its head tilted slightly, as if listening. And then, it stood up. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The figure didn't move toward me. It just stood there, its head still tilted, as if waiting for something. A breath. A word. A mistake. I grabbed the door handle and yanked it shut as hard as I could, my hands shaking. The moment the lock clicked into place, the air changed. The scent of rot was gone. The hallway felt normal again. But behind the door, I still felt it. Standing there, listening. I didn't finish my rounds that night. I went straight to the break room, my breath still uneven, my hands ice cold. Sandra looked up from her coffee and saw my face. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She just sighed and said, "You should have listened. Something isn't right. I've worked night shifts before. I know what exhaustion feels like. The heavy eyelids, the foggy brain, the moments where your mind plays tricks on you. But this is different." I stand in room 409, staring at an empty hospital bed. Just minutes ago, an elderly man named Mr. Downing had been lying there, frail but stable. He was my patient. I had checked his vitals, adjusted his and even noted his blood pressure in my chart. Now he's gone. The sheets are smooth, untouched, like no one had ever been in the bed at all. I swallow hard. Maybe another nurse moved him. Maybe there was an emergency transfer, and I just wasn't informed. That has to be it, right? I turn toward the nurse's station, my footsteps echoing in the dimly lit hallway. The hospital is quiet in a way that feels unnatural, like a space waiting to be filled. Sandra is behind the desk, typing something into the system. She looks up as I approach. "Hey," I say, keeping my voice steady. "Did someone move, Mr. Downing?" She frowns. "Who?" "Mr. Downing. My patient in 409. Sandra stares at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, she turns her chair toward the computer and starts typing. I watch her eyes flick across the screen, searching. Her face goes pale. "Thomas," she says quietly, "there's no patient in 409. I let out a small, nervous laugh. "That's impossible. I checked on him less than 20 minutes ago." Sandra doesn't respond. She just turns a monitor toward me. The screen displays the patient list for tonight's shift. Room 409 is empty. No name, no medical record, no admission history. I feel something cold creep on my spine. This has to be a mistake, I say. I talk to him. I check his vitals. He was right there. Sandra shakes her head, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. Thomas, are you sure? I open my mouth to argue, but a flicker of doubt settles in my mind. I turn and walk back to the room, heart pounding in my chest. The air feels colder when I step inside. I move to the bedside table, searching for anything. An empty 4-bag, a chart, a sign that someone had been here. But there's nothing, not even an indentation in the pillow. It's like he was never here at all. I run a hand through my hair, trying to think logically. Maybe I wrote the wrong room number in my chart. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe. Then I noticed something. The chair in the corner of the room. When I first came in, it had been facing the bed. But now it's turned toward me. I stare at it, my skin crawling. I didn't touch that chair. I know I didn't. The overhead lights flicker once. Then, from somewhere down the hall, I hear a sound. A whisper. It's faint, almost like a breath, but I swear it says my name. I take a slow step back, my pulse thudding in my ears. I don't check the hallway. I don't try to find where the whisper came from. I turn and walk straight back to the nurse's station, forcing myself to stay calm. When I reach Sandra, I lean in close and lower my voice. Something's wrong, I whisper. I know I didn't imagine him. Sandra doesn't say anything. She just stares at me with wide, knowing eyes. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she says, "They notice when you remember them." A chill spreads through my body. The lights flicker again. I'd had enough. The whispers, the shadows, the strange, shifting halls that never seemed quite right. The missing patience, the feeling that something was watching me, always watching. It was too much to ignore anymore. I had to get answers, even if I didn't know what I was walking into. The night shift had barely begun when I decided to find Dr. Ashford. I'd seen him lurking around the hospital, always just on the edge of the chaos, like he knew something no one else did. His icy demeanor and cryptic warnings made my skin crawl, but it didn't matter anymore. I needed to know. I made my way to the lower level of the hospital, where his office was tucked away behind a set of heavy, rusted doors. The air here was thick, like it hadn't seen fresh air in years. I couldn't help but notice the way the walls seemed to close in as I walked through the hall. The old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering intermittently, casting long, uneven shadows. When I reached the door, I hesitated for a moment, listening. Nothing. No strange sounds. No whispers in the corners. I almost wished I'd heard something. Maybe then I wouldn't have felt so alone. I knocked once, and then pushed the door open. The office was exactly as I'd expected. Dark, cluttered, and steeped in silence. A heavy oak desk sat in the center, papers strewn across it like forgotten memories. Dr. Ashford stood by the window, his back to me, staring out into the night. His silhouette was sharp against the dim light, and the shadows stretched long and menacing across the floor. "Dr. Ashford," I said, trying to sound confident, but the words came out hoarse. "We need to talk." He didn't move for a moment, and the stillness hung between us like a weight. Finally, he turned slowly, his face expressionless as always. His eyes seemed distant, like he was seeing something far beyond the walls of his office. "You've been breaking the rules," he said quietly, his voice colder than I remembered. He spoke as if it were a simple fact, something obvious and unavoidable. He didn't seem surprised. "I warned you, Thomas." I felt a chill run down my spine. He knew. He knew everything. What's going on here? What is this place? Dr. Ashford took a step forward, his movements deliberate, almost measured. His eyes never left mine, as if he were waiting for me to understand something, waiting for the realization to sink in. "You think this hospital is just a place to heal, don't you?" he asked. "A place where the sick come to get better. You think we're here to fix things, to fix people." He let out a low, mirthless chuckle. "No, that's not what this place is. Not anymore." I felt my throat tighten. "Then what is it?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice, and for the first time, there was a crack of something darker in his tone. "This place is a doorway, a thin spot between the living and something else." His words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "There are forces here, Thomas. Old forces, and they're not interested in healing anyone." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "So what? We're just feeding them? That's why we have the rules." He nodded slowly. "The rules aren't just for your safety. They're for the hospitals, for the patients, for all of us." The rules are meant to keep it contained, to keep it from getting out. Every time you break one of them, you're giving it more power, more attention. He paused, his eyes darkening. And once it notices you, there's no going back. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. You're saying the hospital itself is alive? Or something in it is? Dr. Ashford's expression remained stoic, but his eyes were filled with something else now, something close to pity. Not the hospital, the space it occupies. This hospital was built on land that has been touched by something far older than any of us. It's always been here. It's always been waiting. I took a step back, the weight of his words crashing over me. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with a heaviness I could taste. What happens if we break too many rules? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped to his desk and picked up a small, worn notebook. He flipped it open to a page I couldn't see and then slid it across the desk toward me. On it, in shaky handwriting, were the same rules I'd seen earlier. Only there was something added to the bottom. Never speak about Thomas Grayson, it read. Never let him leave. I felt a knot twist in my stomach. What does that mean? Dr. Ashford's eyes bored into mine, dark and unreadable. It means that you're already part of it now. You broke the rules, and now it won't let you go. I stumbled backward, the words sinking in like a weight dragging me deeper into a black hole. You knew. You knew all along. Dr. Ashford's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, but it wasn't kind. I've known for a long time, Thomas, and I'm trying to protect you. But now, he shook his head, his voice dropping to a whisper. Now it's too late. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me, and the room seemed to warp and twist, the walls bending in a way that made me dizzy. The air felt thick, suffocating. My breath quickened, panic rising in my chest. You can't leave, Dr. Ashford called out, his voice distant but firm. You've broken the rules. It knows you now, and it won't let you escape. I ran, blindly, into the hallway, but the hospital felt different now. The shadows seemed to move, the hallways twisted into unfamiliar paths, and the whispers returned, louder than ever, calling my name from the dark. And somewhere, deep in the bowels of St. Vincent's Memorial Hospital, something stirred. Something ancient. And it was waiting for me. It was too late. The rules had already been broken, and I was its next victim. It was my last night. I could feel in my bones. I had decided, after the things I'd seen, after everything that had happened, that I would never set foot in this place again. The thought of another night in this hospital, with its secrets and its rules, was unbearable. I would pack my things and leave the moment the shift ended. I was done. The night started the same way as any other, quiet and still, as if the hospital itself was holding its breath. I walked through the halls, checking on patients who were barely alive, most of them lost to their own comas. The old machines hummed softly, the fluorescent lights above flickered every so often, casting long shadows on the walls. It felt like the kind of silence that pressed down on you, suffocating you bit by bit. Around 2 a.m., the strange feeling in my gut returned. I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something wrong, something off about this place. I tried to shake it off. I had made my decision. This was my last night, and I wouldn't let it drag me any further into madness. That's when the first thing happened. The doors. They locked. I didn't hear them lock, didn't see anyone near them, but I tried to leave the break room to check on a few patients, and the door wouldn't budge. I turned the handle again. Nothing. It was as if the hospital itself had decided to trap me in. My heart began to race. I cursed under my breath, pacing in the small hallway. I knew I couldn't leave now, and the instinct to run only made me feel more trapped. I checked the other doors. All of them. Every single one locked. I couldn't get to the elevators or the stairs. I was stuck, locked inside this godforsaken place. I should have been terrified, but instead, a strange calmness washed over me. I had been ignoring all the warnings, all the strange things that had happened. Maybe it was time to finally face whatever was in this hospital. It was too late to leave now, and running felt pointless. That's when the lights flickered. For a moment, they went completely out, plunging the entire floor into complete darkness. My breath hitched in my throat. I tried to move, to reach for the flashlight I kept in my pocket, but before I could, the lights snapped back on. They didn't flicker back in. They snapped, and when they did, everything felt wrong. The shadows seemed deeper than they had before, darker, stretching across the walls and floor as though they were alive, growing long and strange. I froze. The air became thick, heavy with something I couldn't explain. I felt it in my chest, an oppressive weight that made it harder to breathe, harder to think. The hallway ahead of me, it didn't look the same. The walls were still the same pale, chipped blue, but they seemed off. The edges of the hallway, the corners, they stretched impossibly far away, as if the walls were getting further apart. I heard it then. A sound, a soft scraping noise like something dragging across the floor just around the corner. I knew I shouldn't go toward it. Every fiber in my body screamed at me to run, to get out. But I didn't. My feet moved on their own, drawing me forward, even though my mind was screaming at me to stop. I turned the corner, and there it was. It wasn't human, not completely. The figure, if you could even call it that, was tall, too tall. Its limbs were impossibly long, thin, and stretched at odd angles. It crawled across the floor with a grotesque ease, its fingers dragging along the tiles like claws. Its head was tilted at a sharp angle, eyes wide and glassy, the pupils black voids that seemed to swallow all light. Its mouth was wide open, too wide, its lips pulled back into a smile that shouldn't have been possible. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I just stared at it, and then it started toward me. It moved with a kind of unnatural speed, like it wasn't bound by the laws of human movement. Its body twisted and contorted as it crawled toward me, and with every inch it came closer, the air around me grew colder. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath clouding in front of me. My hand shook, my pulse racing, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, unable to tear my eyes away from the thing. It stopped in front of me. The silence was unbearable. It was like the entire hospital had gone still, holding its breath. And then it whispered. It was my name. Soft, distorted, but unmistakable. Thomas. The voice. It wasn't just one voice. It was a blend of voices, all calling my name at once, overlapping, echoing in my mind. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed. The figure reached out, its long, cold fingers brushing against my cheek. It felt like ice, like death itself touching me. I shuddered, but I couldn't pull away. I was trapped, in this moment, with no way out. I thought I heard the door behind me, the one that had locked, unlock. I spun around in a frenzy, but the moment I moved, the figure's grip tightened. Its fingers dug into my skin, cold and biting, and its smile grew wider. You shouldn't have broken the rules, it whispered, its voice like 1,000 ghosts trapped in a single body. You'll stay here now, forever. And then the floor beneath me gave way. The hospital, the walls, the hall, everything seemed to bend and twist. It felt like I was being pulled into the very fabric of the place itself, sinking deeper into its heart. The figure's voice faded into the background, but I could still feel its eyes on me. I reached for the door, but it was already too late. I don't know how I made it out of St. Vincent's. The hours felt like days. The halls twisted and groaned, as if the hospital itself was alive and trying to swallow me whole. My mind was foggy, but the terror was sharper than ever. I could hear it, feel it, the presence that had been stalking me, hiding in the shadows, waiting, was closer than I could bear. The last thing I remember was running down the corridor, my breath ragged, my footsteps echoing off the sterile walls. The lights flickered above me, casting long, jittery shadows that seemed to stretch and twist into shapes I didn't want to acknowledge. I kept my head down, my heart racing, but the whispers never stopped. Thomas. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The hallways turned into an endless maze, the exits I thought I'd pass slipping further out of reach. I slammed into a wall, my hands shaking as I searched the security panel for the emergency release button. But the screen was blank, just a reflection of myself, sweaty, pale, and wide-eyed with fear. I could feel it then, that cold weight pressing on my chest. Something was behind me. I didn't dare turn around. It was there. I could hear it breathing, heavy, slow. The air around me grew thick with an unnatural chill. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as the darkness behind me shifted, the air vibrating with a sound like fingernails on glass. I didn't need to see it to know it was close. It was always close. I pressed the button, my fingers trembling. The heavy doors in front of me slid open with a soft hiss, but the sound of that hiss felt too loud, too alive. Without a second thought, I ran. Through the doors, into the empty parking lot, gasping for breath, my legs burning. The hospital loomed behind me, a dark silhouette against the dim glow of the streetlights. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, and threw myself inside. The engine roared to life. I slammed the door shut, my hands still shaking, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. As I sped away, the hospital faded into the rearview mirror. But that oppressive weight, the feeling that something had followed me, it stayed. It never left. I kept my hands on the wheel, my eyes glued to the road ahead, praying to God I was far enough away. But something in my gut told me I wasn't. The drive felt like it took hours, though I couldn't remember the exact time. All I could think about was getting home, getting safe, putting the nightmare behind me. When I finally reached my apartment, I thought I was free. I locked the door behind me, sank down onto the couch, and let out a shaky breath. My mind was racing, my body still trembling. I tried to tell myself it was over, that it was just a bad dream, a horrible, twisted part of me that I could escape. But then I caught my reflection in the window. For a moment, I couldn't process it. I thought the glass was dirty. I reached up to wipe it away, but no, there was something wrong with my eyes. They were black, hollow, like something had taken them, like something was looking back at me from inside. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. I reached up to touch my face, but the skin felt wrong, like it wasn't my own. Something was missing. It was as if a part of me had been carved out, and I didn't know how or when it had happened. But I knew. I knew I hadn't escaped. It had followed me. I grabbed my phone, my hands slick with sweat, desperate to call for help. I dialed the number of the hospital, but the line was dead. No dial tone. No nothing. Just the sound of static. Then a voice. A whisper. "We never forget." I threw the phone across the room, but I couldn't escape it. The shadows in the room felt deeper now, closing in around me. The whispers were growing louder, closer. I couldn't outrun it. Not really. I had broken the rules, and now there would be a price to pay. For the first time in a long time, I let myself acknowledge what I had been denying all night. I looked down at my hands, my trembling fingers, those black eyes staring back at me, and I understood. There was no escape. It had already claimed me. It had been watching me the whole time.